And now, because as I said, you can take these tokens outside of the platform. You can't legally do this yet, but because people are doing that, they use these platforms like Uniswap and SushiSwap, and they have all other different mechanisms to move tokens outside of the platform. You can then exchange them for fiat currencies, or you can exchange them for other cryptocurrencies. So what that means is, for example, in the Philippines at the moment, you've got people through COVID who are actually playing games in order to feed their families.
That is Natasha Blycha, and this is episode 42 of the Blockchain Pro podcast. Hello and welcome to episode 42 of the Blockchain Pro podcast. I'm Adriana and Natasha, and today's guest is Natasha Blycha. Natasha is the type of person that you can make an instant connection with. She's experienced and outspoken, and she has chosen a career in law for a very specific and somewhat unexpected reason, which you are about to find out. Let's get to know Natasha. Hi, Natasha.
Hey, Adriana. Lovely to be here.
Thank you for being here. I'm excited about talking to you. Let's go back to the beginning. How did you get started with law?
How did I get started with law? Well, let me tell an entertaining story then, potentially. I was always deciding, do I want to be a doctor or a lawyer? I absolutely loved the idea of being a doctor. Wanting to work with people, help them get better. And then at some point I had a thought about what fashion you got to wear if you were a doctor or a lawyer. And I thought, if I forward cast, I love clothing and I love art and creativity. I thought that perhaps I'll be able to wear more exciting fashion if I was a lawyer. That's only a partial truth. But there is something in that I could see myself as a lawyer. The other interesting thing I found out recently was we did a bit of looking back to the history of my maiden name, my family, which is Nalder, Nalder. And I found that we have a century or more of records on the census that my family have been lawyers and barristers in England. And I didn't know that. So it's only through being able to go back through the records and do a bit of cross work that is a long history of family of lawyers. So perhaps it was something that was in my DNA. Who knows?
Oh, there you go. That's interesting.
Yeah.
And since going through law school and starting your career, I've read that you were always very interested in digital law.
I think that's right. I mean, I came from a family, my father was always pushing computers, even when we were little. And I'm old enough that I'm certainly old enough that we started as a group who didn't have computers. So I remember we had a computer in our house, a couple of them, which were the black screens with the green writing, and also came from a family which were really massive readers. So massively, my grandmother was obsessed with sending us books and teaching us to learn. So something between a curiosity and a culture in the family of technology, innovation, and learning has always meant that we're always looking for what's coming next. So that's always been there. Having said that, Adriana, I am rubbish in using a computer. Don't like some of my actual physical technical skills. I am not the person who wants to edit things. I'm rubbish. So understanding the processes is more so than actually being the person who could, I don't have good IT skills.
Okay, but all right. So bringing that into your crypto law practice, how did you go about learning how to, use crypto and talking to people about it?
I suppose I have a slightly different entree into crypto than most people. I had taken off so I'd been a lawyer practicing as a competition lawyer, and then I took off a lot of time to raise my 4 children. So we lived all over the world. My husband's a lawyer as well, and we lived in the Middle East. I'd worked in the States. We lived in Singapore for a few years. And during that time, I was lucky enough to still be able to keep reading and learning. And then when I came back to the law, it was nearly 10 years. I was quite, and I've said this before on record, I was quite surprised that the law hadn't moved in 10 years from what I had been doing and practicing to when I came back, notwithstanding that I knew technology had changed so much. So what that meant was that I started asking a lot of questions, probably being quite difficult, saying, why should I be doing this if I'm pretty sure an algorithm could be doing this? So then, yeah, I think a couple of other things intersected is that as someone who'd been off for a number of years and I had really low confidence, and I just didn't know, there was things I didn't know about practice anymore. When I wanted to be able to present on these new innovations, I spent weekends and days, and you commented when we first met, you've got folders on your desk. I thought, if I'm going to be presenting on this out of fear, I have to know absolutely everything. So I spent so much time preparing for anything. If someone else would spend 1 hour, I would spend 20 hours. And it was because I was scared I wouldn't be able to understand all of it. All that fear has really held me in good stead, because it grounded me in a very good baseline understanding of what were the issues that led to, I suppose, the rise of the CryptoPunk. What are the issues across the entire banking sector, across the money markets, money supply, the interaction with government policy, and also understanding that lots of people don't know what's going on. So in traditional markets, there's a real gap at the governance and leadership, through no fault of their own. There's a real sort of lacuna between who's in charge in different organizations and their digital knowledge, as compared to what's happening, the horses bolted in the actual markets, where you've got trillions of dollars that is moving through in these new types of products, new types of assets, and new types of platforms. So that being the joy, maybe this is the doctor's work of what I like to start off, is being able to help synthesize, connect teams, and bring people together to give confidence to people in governance to say, these are the risks around what you're looking at in these digital assets, and here are the opportunities.
And okay, so how long ago did you start looking into these different risks and opportunity, and have they evolved, or are we still looking at the same risks and opportunities, and what are they?
So I think I've been highly focused on this for about 5 years in a probably quite a pointed way, and even more so in the last 4 years. There is movement. So in terms of regulation and government intersection, there is movement. And if you look at things like in the BIS, the Bank of International Settlements, the work they're doing with central bank digital currencies, if you look at some of the wonderful, like UK Law Commission, Australian Law Society, the Law Council of Australia, there are senior people and senior organisations which are getting their head around what's happening and gathering people together to make change. However, nobody in any of the main jurisdictions that I've seen has actually really cracked being able to integrate digital assets into their economies in a seamless way. And as a result, there are really strange flights of capital and digital capital that is taking place between different structurings that we see in almost regulatory shopping, where people are either using different jurisdictions which have low regulation in order to have their new crypto businesses or digital businesses be able to operate out of those jurisdictions, which is I would say to any government, this is a massive opportunity. The first governments who actually get their head around what digital assets are, how they integrate into existing regimes, those governments and those economies will see massive blooms of fiscal opportunity. Good example being Canada. So Canada was able to list on their stock exchange a number of Bitcoin ETFs and some other bundles of digital assets. These are funds with billion-dollar funds, so they're really going great guns. So that's just a very small example of what I think will happen. But if you were to say to me, Natasha, what's the main difference between a digital asset? Why is it something that's so difficult to integrate into existing regimes? I've thought about this problem a lot and had the privilege of working at my firm, HSF, with the Digital Law Group, and then the Digital Law Association, which is made up with sort of technology lawyers and technologists across the world. And this is what I think one of the pressing issues is that digital assets don't stay still. And you used the word evolution. So typical assets, or possessible or tangible assets, they are what they are. They stay in the four walls of that asset. But when you have a digital asset, it has a performing or automated performance component. So if your asset is a horse, a digital asset of a horse, a digital twin of a horse, as it's running over time, it collects data about its running. So the horse itself becomes the digital asset horse. It enlarges over time, or it grows together with the data that accrues to it. So that means that legislation has been set up to deal with things that stay the same. And also legislation we don't have, for example, you can't own data under the law anywhere. You can control data, but you can't own it, for the reason that you need to own something in property rights. You need to be able to get your hands around it. You need to be able to say, what is the thing I'm owning? So you can exclude those rights against the rest of the world. But if something's continually changing and evolving, how do you say, I own this thing? In legal judgments, they say, how do you capture a cloud? It's lovely poetry, isn't it? But this is something with these assets and with these platforms is one of the key elements that we need to get our heads around, is how do we deal with assets that change shape and evolve over time?
It's very interesting, because I think Bitcoin specifically was created to challenge all of existed, right? It's like new financial system model. So it's very interesting to see how everybody's trying to make it fit into a box of existing things, because it's not possible. You do have to create new rules around it, right?
That's right. And in some ways, Bitcoin's the easiest one to deal with.
Definitely.
It's actually quite simple. It's clear fields of data, which is about how much, when, where, identification. It's not too difficult. But once you start moving into smart contracts, Ethereum-based or not Ethereum-based, you're just adding far more complexity of what is actually under the remit of the automation of that asset. And then you move all the way through to smart legal contracts. And then you also, on the edge of these assets, you look at decentralized autonomous organizations, or DAOs. You're starting to say these are entities or assets that are actually being run and evolving and changing without human oversight in the same way that we have before. So there's an element of complexity. So I never judge the regulators or government in this instance, because these are tricky things to integrate, because our whole economy is shifting to be able to integrate them.
So how do you think they should go about trying to make some rules around how to use and interact with crypto?
Well, it's the $1 million question. I don't know if these are the right answers, but this is where I probably would say that I've got my head at the moment, is that first of all, you need to name them. So we always say things like the law should be technology agnostic, and that is largely true. However, as I've described, because we're moving into asset classes where the assets don't stay the same, this is the introduction of something that is fundamentally different into the equation. It's not about using blockchain technology or using cloud computing. This is something different. We're trying to capture a cloud as something that people are relying on and taking into their funds and taking into their, the property that they believe that they own. So first thing is naming it. So in this instance, you might say securities regulators being able to make a distinction between what is a digital asset and when it should be regulated and when it shouldn't. And that's just in a regulatory sense. Then there's a whole other integration piece that needs to take place. I'll give you an example that seems fringe, but is becoming, it's really interesting, but it demonstrates how changeable this is. When you have gaming, so let's say gaming, I tend to use this example of the, oh gosh, what's the chain of that you go into when you want to do gaming and you play the basketball shot and you can play cars. You go in and you use gold tokens to go in there. What's that gaming shop? Physical gaming shop that you go into. Do you take children for children's parties?
Oh, like the arcade, gaming arcade.
Like a gaming arcade. Let's say a gaming arcade. If you go into a gaming arcade, what you will do at the moment is you will get tokens, a physical token that you can only use in the arcade. So that has been the equivalent of digital games and digital platforms as well. And anyone who is into crypto regulation will know that what has happened is the regulators have all said, to the extent you're doing what happens in a gaming arcade, you're fine, because that's something that happens in platform, and it's in crypto circles, they call it a utility token. So what's happened now is that you are moving these tokens outside of the gaming arcade, and you're wanting to go next door and you want to use the tokens to be able to buy fish and chips at the shop next door, or you want to use it on your MasterCard to go and buy something else completely unrelated to the game. That has massive implications for the economy, because obviously through your taxation systems, through your AML, CTF requirements, your money laundering, there's a whole bunch of reasons that we like to know who's spending what and doing what they're doing. Where it gets, these delicious new issues is that you have people now who are using gaming and using the development of gaming to earn tokens, digital tokens. And now, because as I said, you can take these tokens outside of the platform. You can't legally do this yet, but because people are doing that, they use these platforms like Uniswap and SushiSwap, and they have all other different mechanisms to move tokens outside of the platform. You can then exchange them for fiat currencies, or you can exchange them for other cryptocurrencies. So what that means is, for example, in the Philippines at the moment, you've got people through COVID who are actually playing games in order to feed their families. And that's never
a really cool story, by the way.
It's not something you used to be able to do. But what that should catalyze for all of us is to say, have you read Ready Player One? Have you seen Ready Player One, the movie? And you say, okay, where is life taking place now? If I can earn my income, if I can buy my groceries, if I can have relationships, if I can use my avatar, I'm actually creating a digital twin of myself that's working in that atmosphere. And that's when we've got to be super critical and super clever to make sure that that's not just happening in a way that is, we've got our eyes open and we're seeing that happening. There's one thing that I suppose keeps me really passionate in this area is I worry a lot about the infrastructure that supports critical assets in the digital arena. And one of those particularly is legal contracts. So if you have critical assets like money in the traditional systems, governments have spent enormous efforts in regulating and creating payment rails, for example, to make sure that money protects consumers and is done in a trusted way. When you come to contracts, these are, the entire economy is run on contracts, legal contracts, and they're ubiquitous. So I think as they digitize, and we call them smart legal contracts, but as legal contracts digitize and they start to perform some of their own obligations, we need to be deeply mindful that we're also creating digital infrastructure that has that indicia of critical digital infrastructure, a public good type indicia, to make sure that all the checks and balances around security, cybersecurity, adoptability, equity, making sure that people can't become, in crypto we talk about debanked. You don't want people to become deplatformed in respect of being able to create legal relations. So there's access to justice. There's some very significant issues that, you know, we can't just leave to venture capital and we can't just leave to corporate interests. We need to really pay attention to these broad trends of people moving increasingly assets and their lives into the digital arena.
So what are some things that young lawyers, or, you know, any lawyer who have not yet played in this space could do to try and help move things along?
I think don't have a linear mind. You know, you look at the great thinkers in history, they don't take traditional, completely traditional career paths. Really wonderful evolutionary changes in the way that we as a human populace have evolved is when people have had cross modality knowledge. And you look at Einstein, he actually, you know, it was, you know, his theory on general relativity was probably just as much came out of his work in the patent office. And no one would say, go and be a physicist, go work in a patent office. So how I extrapolate that for young lawyers is say, if you're just doing your coursework that's sitting in front of you and you're not reading anything else and you're not talking to other people and you're not having intergenerational conversations and you're not learning about nature or quantum physics or whatever, you're probably at risk of thinking the same as everybody else and not having you know, the best neuroscience connected brains are ones that are hyper connected. There's a lot of cross gray matter activity. If you've got a brain like that, then you're probably someone who's going to be able to help in these really complex understandings of how we change our economy and change our cultures to be able to accommodate the fact we're entering a new realm. We're in it's not like, you know, we used to go and find another piece of land. We've conquered Everest. We're actually in the Wild West of a new land, which is the digital land.
So basically decentralize your mind.
I love it. Yes. Decentralize your mind. Yes.
Awesome. I love it too. All right. Last episode, I introduced a new thing, which means we are getting to the end, which are the quick three. So 3 quick questions. What are you currently reading?
Oh gosh.
Not the binders behind you, outside of work.
they kind of all seem to interact. Do you know what? At the moment, I'm on a really trying to read a lot about all the mystics, and I'm trying to learn about Indigenous, particularly Australian Indigenous culture, because there's some really interesting things that they do in terms of connectivity of the mind and mystical traditions about consciousness. So I'm deeply interested in consciousness. There's a text I've read on consciousness at the moment as well, which is going into more the traditional science on consciousness. So trying to understand through, well, you're going to ask me particular names of the books. I probably read at least 3 books a week. So the names of the books are less important. I just take it all. Yeah. So gosh, consciousness and mystics. Yeah.
Oh, that sounds very interesting. That's an unexpected answer. Okay, so do you have a favorite crypto-related resource?
Crypto-related resource. Can I say the internet?
But that's all of them.
That's all of it. No, I don't think I do. Well, look, this is a really uncool answer, but I would say social media is massively helpful through connecting you to other people. So I spend a lot of time curating the people I connect into. So, for example, if I read the newspaper in the morning when I get a cup of coffee, I would, if I saw someone interesting who's writing on architecture, or if I see someone interesting in any way, I connect that person. What that means is my social media feeds feed me a lot of useful content. So I am constantly being exposed to, through clever connections of these curated, amazing people. I get a lot of what's happening, latest stuff happening with government, but also the latest stuff that's happening in science, the latest stuff that's happening in physics, and the latest stuff that's happening in quantum computing. That's because I connected to other people of interest.
That sounds good. I want to go through your Twitter, see who you're following and check them out now.
Mostly, LinkedIn is wonderful. If people use it right, rather than just for an ego brag, it's actually an amazing resource.
Oh, thanks. That would be me. But I did go through your LinkedIn before our interview, and I was going, oh my gosh, she shares a lot of really interesting things that are not just law related, which I find it fascinating because most people do have a centralized brain.
Yeah, and we have to, I think on this one, Elon Musk is right. I think we actually have some very serious, climate change is a real issue ahead of us, but our interactions with AI, what we as humans in terms of a cyborg type future have ahead of us, we should, as I said, we should be looking at those things with open eyes. It doesn't matter if it takes 50 years or if it's 20 years ahead of us. There's some significant risk involved.
And I guess a lot of the things that we are working on in terms of automating stuff and taking humans out of the equation are like a step to this future where entities are going to be talking to each other independently of humans.
Yes, quite right. And then you say, okay, well, what happened with the financial crisis when we let that happen in a way that had that unguarded set of interacting equations? That's why we need to be really mindful about our human in the loop design at the right times in the right places and the right level of segregation of risk, so that there's design that has the right level of interaction and the right level of segregation, because there's a balance in nature. Nature always balances those two things, and nature's a really clever place to us to look when we design our tech.
It is indeed. Okay, last quick 3 question. Do you have a favorite crypto project? Not, obviously not in the sense that, oh, go buy this token, but, a project that you've seen that is doing something that is really different or trying to solve a problem that really exists.
Gosh, I could be self-serving and say the ones that I've been involved in, which is that to build infrastructure for legal contracts, which I'm deeply passionate about, working with the government to try to be able, through CSIRO and the firm HSF, to try to create infrastructure for each sovereign nation that is dedicated to legal contracts.
That the Australian National Blockchain Project?
This is a good point. It was called the Australian National Blockchain. We don't call it that anymore because actually the word blockchain is a bit of a bottleneck. As soon as people hear that word, they bring a whole bunch of assumptions to it. So we had to drop the name, but the project is absolutely still ongoing. So yeah, that's probably my favorite one, which is a good thing since I spent a lot of my life working on it.
All right. How can we find more information about it?
Well, you can contact me, or alternatively watch this space, because there's some big things happening behind the scenes on that right now.
Oh, interesting. I'm looking forward to hearing more. Yeah. All right, that's it. Thank you so much for your time today and sharing your wealth of knowledge with us.
Oh, thanks so much. It's been a joy.
And that was the vivacious Natasha Blycha. If you have questions for Natasha or simply would like to connect, I've added her social links to the description for you. Keep an eye out for announcements about the special project she's working on. We can expect interesting things coming out of her corner very soon. That's all from me today. I hope you enjoyed this episode, made with joy just for you. Whatever you are up to next, wherever you are, have a wonderful time, and I will see you on the next block. Bye!